Like those out in the audience to please introduce us and let us know what town you're from or representing them so that we'll all have an idea who's present. So, Diane, you want to start?
I'm Diane Whalen, and I'm from Sabattis.
I'm Christy Willett from Litchfield.
Vicki Russell from Litchfield.
Jen Waterman, Sabattis.
I'm Bob English, Wales.
Robert Gayton, Sabattis.
Joe Fisher, Sabattis.
Scott Fife, Wales.
Jill Bouchard, Litchfield.
Mark Duquette, Selectman, Sabattis.
Pam?
Litchfield, Select Board, Raina Leibowitz.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Town Manager, Litchfield, Kelly Weisenfeld.
Wilson?
Ben Wilson, Principal of the Middle School and Primary School.
Pam?
Teresa Medor, Litchfield Budget Committee.
Okay. Paul? Randy?
Mayor.
I'm Randy Greenwood. My hat tonight is the Town of Wales Board of Selectmen.
Thank you. Sharon?
Sharon Siegel, I'm non-official as you pointed out.
Okay. All right.
But you're the boss.
Jonathan, we'll start over there.
I'm Jonathan Barney, Director of Operations.
Jessica Kuhlman, Business Manager.
Kathy Martin, Assistant Superintendent.
Andy Carlton, Superintendent.
I'm Kathy Cogan with CHA. I'm the director of the K-12 Design Studio.
I'm Nat Cram, also architect at CHA.
Okay, so tonight's workshop, we're going to be giving a presentation about the new construction that we're looking to do adding on to the middle school. And I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to move out of here. So I'm not in the way of this, and I can see it much better than to have to twist around and turn anyway. And I will turn it over to the architects.
I think
Right.
I'm going to start.
You're going to start?
I'm going to start, yeah.
You got your engineering degree?
What's that? Close.
Okay.
Close. You did. Okay. How do you do that? Where's the gadget? Do you have a gadget?
Oh, no.
Yeah, I know. This is dangerous. So construction project and restructuring. So just, I want to give a little history first. When I came to RSU4 10 years ago, the RSU was relatively new at that point in time. I can't remember, what was the exact, it was 2009?
Yeah.
It was 2009 was when the RSU was formed. So, you know, we were 3 years into being an RSU. One of the conversations that I heard when I started here 10 years ago as the assistant principal at the high school was, at some point we're going to need to restructure the district. And that has been a theme since I've been here. When I took over as superintendent in 2017, one of the things this board said to me, and a lot of you weren't here at the time, was we want to reorganize the district. We've got two relatively aging buildings, or pretty old buildings at this point, that need a lot of work. We had just completed phase 1 performance contract and put a bunch of money into the high school. Did some building envelope work, Carrie Ricker at the middle school, but spent, I think it was probably 1.7, Robbie,
Yeah.
1.7 million, as mostly at the high school. Looking at, and the whole goal behind that was we're going to put money into the 3 buildings we plan to have long term. You know, since then, we put a new roof on at the high school, which was 63% funded by the state. We also have done a phase 2 performance contract where we did quite a bit of work at the middle school, at Carrie Ricker, and at the high school, trying to tidy those things up. All that said, one of the goals behind it all was to get those 3 buildings to a point where they were ready for the future, so that we could take on a construction project at some point. And I can't speak for the board members that were there at the time, but it was pretty clear to me that this district needed to restructure. Those were something that I was being tasked to look at moving forward, and it took some time to get there. Change is hard, and really having that conversation. So we looked at this, and I have to say, I've been blessed. One, with a fantastic school board who has been very supportive, but also community as well, and our administrative team. And so when we talk about phased reorganization and restructuring, that wasn't just me. That was the board, that was the administrative team, that was all of us coming together to really put our heads together about what's best for students. So We looked at reorganization and restructuring as a couple of phase process. So as you probably know, we reorganized the district this year. We put all of our grade levels together for continuity of education. There were two goals, and anybody who's been here through that process has heard me say, A, we want to get our kids all together so all of our kids are having the same educational experiences. So there's equity in the education that we provide. The other piece of it was, having watched what had happened in other school districts with major construction projects where you closed buildings, opened brand new buildings, and dumped a bunch of educators together who had never worked together in a new building that needed new routines, that never goes well. It just doesn't. And I, have some friends that work in other school districts, and that's what had happened. And so the goal was to have our educators in all grade levels working together to build relationships so that when it comes time for restructuring, they've worked together, they've formed those relationships, and so that piece is done. You always have new people that come in, but the core groups typically stay, and they don't have to learn how to work together. That piece is already taken care of. Now what they need to do is learn how to work together in a new building, which is far less strenuous. So anyway, we took on reorganization. Restructuring really is about, and the question really becomes the why. The why are we restructuring? First of all, talking about the history, I've heard from many people that, case in point, Sabattis, back along, when the middle school was done, the current middle school, the plan was to close Sabattis Primary and move all the kids up to that campus. It was built with an addition in mind. Same thing with Carrie Ricker. That I had heard that conversation had been happening for years about the possibility of closing Libby Tozier, putting an addition on it, Carrie Ricker, and having all the kids under one roof. And so because of that, that laid the groundwork for the RSU doing that in the future. We took a look at those buildings. Libby Tozier and Sabattis Primary are aging buildings, the 50-year-old buildings plus. The district has maintained them, but all of that extra, work that needs to happen on a yearly basis, some of that got deferred. And deferred maintenance has been something that school districts and municipalities have done for years, because it's easy when times get tough to cut the things you don't have to do right now, and then you push them down the road. And so that's happened to some degree in those buildings. When things break, we fix them. We take care of them, but we haven't put a ton of money bringing those buildings from when they were built, as far as building envelope, roofs, windows, heating systems, things like that, controls, all that stuff. We haven't done that work. A lot of that work is still original in those buildings. And so consequently, they now are at a point where they need a significant amount of work to inhabit as a school building. And I think that's really important when we talk about this, is there's a huge difference between inhabiting a building with 200 students every day and inhabiting it, say, for a business, for, a town office, things like that. There's just it's a very different usage. And so for our purposes, to keep those buildings open, we need to do a lot of work right now. And case in point, I'll be quite candid, I think you've all heard me say it, we're gonna end up replacing the boiler at Libby Tozier. It is done. It's running on its last legs, it's got 3 cracked sections, we're at a point where we have no choice. But you've heard the saying many times, the chickens come home to roost. Well, they're coming home to roost. And the question becomes really, how do you want to spend money? Do you want to put it into 2 aging buildings that are still going to be buildings that are 50 years old when you're done? Or do you want to spend money and build something for the future of these communities that will be with you for the next 50 years? It's an easy one for me to say because that's what I want for my kids. But ultimately, that's where we stand. And so, that's the history. One of the things that we've done as part of reorganization is get all of our kids getting the same educational experiences. Those of us that work in schools, we know that every building has its own culture. And so you may have a climate. You may have, kindergarten at Libby Tozier and kindergarten at Sabattis Primary, but the kids, it's the same grade, but at the same time, they have different things that they do. And for me, it really hit home a few years ago when Read Across America happened, and I only did it at Libby Tozier. And I went, oh, okay, so this is that equity piece. This is that piece. Sabattis didn't have that as one of their traditions. And so, you know, we've done a really good job over the last few years of trying to create those things, but there's no substitute for all of your grade level educators working together to create the same experiences for kids. Obviously, I've talked about long-term maintenance costs. I mean, there is a ton of work that needs to be done in those buildings for us to continue to habit them long-term. And even then, I come back to, we're still sitting on 50-year-old buildings. Beyond that, there is a cost associated with operating 5 buildings. I mean, those 2 buildings alone, and I again, this is a number from a couple of years ago. I haven't dug this deep into it at this point. But the operational costs of those 2 buildings, a couple of years ago, those of you that were here when we looked at phase 2, the operational costs of those buildings are about $500,000 a year. So not only do they need work, but we also spend $500,000 a year in operational costs on those 2 buildings a year in buildings that are not efficient. They're not energy efficient. They're not efficient for student movement in the way we work today. I mean, thinking about Sabattis Primary, two stories, you know, at Sabattis Primary with old windows, it's hot. It's not, you know, it's not necessarily pleasant. So with plumbing issues and septic issues that we've had, or water issues, all of those things add up in aging buildings. So, you know, there's a cost associated with having 5 buildings versus 3. There just is. Furthermore, reducing the number of transfers among buildings for students. I mean, obviously right now, our kids are making a lot of transfers. They just are. You know, it was really important to get them together. If we restructure to the point where we're in 3 buildings, you think about the number of transitions a student has to make is significantly reduced. It just is. And kids are tough. I mean, kids are amazing. You know, usually when we make big systemic changes, it's not the kids that have the struggle necessarily. The kids are usually fine. We as adults get angst about that because of the routines that have been in place. But ultimately, the less times we can have a student transition buildings is better for that kid that day and for the rest of their school career. They develop better relationships with their teachers and with their peers. And so, you know, lastly, I think it's really important that we talk about the middle school. The middle school was not designed to hold necessarily, you know, middle school students exclusively. There are spaces in that building that were designed for middle school students, but that building was really designed for, I believe 3 to 8. Was it, Robin? Yeah, 3 to 8. And so there are spaces in that building that are really small. They're small to put, you know, 20 7th and 8th graders in. And so they work. Yep, they do work. We don't have adequate science lab space, things like that. It'd be really nice to think about as we talk about 21st century learning and maker spaces and things of those nature. Real places to hold a day treatment program, a place to, which saves us money in the long run, to be quite honest, and it's a whole other conversation. Places to truly do functional life skills and showcase student work and create the learning opportunities that we want for our students today for the future. You know, the current middle school has spaces like that, but not the way it needs to be to truly house middle school students. So that, you know, really breaks down the why. You know, it's hard in today's, where today is, you know, with regards to inflation and things like that. When we started looking at phase 2, one of the numbers we heard was about 7 or 8 million, roughly, those buildings needed. Am I right with that number?
Yeah.
You know, we didn't go so deep into it because we knew we weren't going to do the work there. But it was 7 or 8 million at that time. Think about, that was 7 years ago? No, 9 years ago. If you think about the cost of materials today, the cost of labor, 9 million is probably more like 15. I mean, it just is with the cost of everything. So it really comes down to how do you want to spend money? And again, for me, it's really about, do you put money, that kind of money, and I talked about it in the budget presentation. You know, I could have put a bunch of money in the budget to put money into those buildings because they need the work. But ultimately, do you want to spend it for something that's 50 years old now, or do you want to build something for the future? And I think, you know, from my perspective, that's what needed to happen. So, you know, where are we in the process? So the board voted for us to put out an RFP for an architect. We did that. We've hired CHA architects to do this work. Formerly Portland Design Team, right? So I was right. Okay. And so consequently, And I will tell you, they've been amazing to work with. You know, for those of us that have had the opportunity to work with these folks from CHA, I had the opportunity to see them do a presentation about a year and a half ago, maybe, at another school district, and was just flabbergasted. It just was amazing to see the work that they do with schools. So that started the process of closing both Libby Tozer and Sabattis Primary and explore building a new addition at Oak Hill Middle School. So, you know, I get this question a lot. Why Oak Hill Middle School? We have 3 buildings I absolutely love. And I love the other 2 buildings. But Carrie Ricker, the middle school, and the high school are fantastic buildings. I love them. They all have their wonderful things. They all have their flaws. That's just the way this works. But, you know, so why did we choose the middle school? You know, it is our newest building. It is the building with the newest systems in it. It is the building that was truly designed for an addition. All the utilities were run to the outside wall. Now, granted, the size addition we're talking about changes that a little bit, but it's all there. The other issue is the access to public utilities. City water, city sewer, right on site. I have I'll be honest, some PTSD about water, if any of you remember. You know, we existed on wells at the high school, and that was rough. That was really, really rough. You know, you never really know what a well has. You never do. So the idea of, you know, putting more students in a building that's on a well with a septic that probably isn't big enough to handle the number of students that we were talking about there, it seemed to make sense. The other thing is we talked about as an A-team, again, it goes back to that conversation of creating a true podded middle school. We really need to do that. We've done that this year to some degree, and it's been very successful, specifically 5th and 6th grade working together, 7th and 8th grade working together, you know, and keeping that model, but building and designing a space for those students. That was the biggest piece, and the campus at the middle school is designed for that. It is set up for that. The other thing is, and I think it's really important to know, our whole goal here was to create 2 schools in one. You know, when you create the middle school, it's really not going to be all Oak Hill Middle School. It actually, and you'll see in the plans, but it'll be two distinct buildings with 2 staggered start times that share an administrative suite. And so, you know, I hear a lot about, well, I can't have my, you know, 2nd grader with 8th graders. Well, you know what, you're right. And we agree with that. And so that's why we want to create 2 separate campuses. You know, ultimately, and so what that comes down to is Libby Tozer and Sabattis Primary being closed. Carrie Ricker School would house grades pre-K to 1. Originally, when we talked about this, we had talked about Carrie Ricker holding pre-K to 2. When we started looking at the design, we realized there was a lot more space in the existing middle school campus to bring 2nd grade out. That will do a couple of things for us. It will allow us to pod 5, 6, 7, 8 like we wanted to. It will also create space at Carrie Ricker for when the time comes to take on CDS, Child Development Services. And so that's coming, even though that bill, Randy and I talked about it recently, died. Don't you agree, Randy? That'll come back. It'll come back, and at some point it will go. And we will be forced in RSU4, just like every other school district, to take on child development services, basically birth to 5. And so, you know, so the reality is going to be, do you want to do another construction project when that time comes, or do we do it now so that we have the space for later? And so so Carrie Ricker, roughly, well, it wouldn't be 400, it'd be more like 300, but that was original numbers. So then you'd have the Oak Hill Middle School campus, and notice I put campus because you've got 2 distinct schools there that would have grades 2 through 8. You'd have 2, 3, 4 in the current building, and you'd have 5 through 8 in the new building. And finally, you'd have Oak Hill High School with approximately 400 students with no change to the current model. You know, like I said, we've done a ton of work at Oak Hill High School. It's in really, really good shape. You know, the roof we put on it, we made the right choice there. I know that was that was an agonizing thing. We were talking about shingle versus rubber versus metal, all that kind of stuff. I think we made the right choice there. We've done a ton of work upgrading the heating systems, the ventilation systems, all those kind of things. So the reality is we will, when this happens, have 3 buildings that'll be in fantastic shape for the future and cut down on those costs that are coming, because they are. And one of them's already here. I mean, that's the reality. The boiler, I've said it before, the boilers give me the most, I lose the most sleep over boilers, especially during the winter. Well, luckily this happened in March, and not in, say, February or January or December. And so, you know, that's kind of the history. That sets the stage for where we are now. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Kathy.
Okay, great, thanks so much, Andy. So I'll start by saying, I'm gonna take the handy dandy gadget.
That's probably a good idea.
I'm gonna start by saying, first of all, 2 things. One, thank you so much for your time this evening, because it really helps us with the design of the project and making sure that we understand what the goals of the community are at large. So I appreciate your time tonight and your feedback. And the second thing is that when Alan and I came here to interview with you guys, we were blown away by how organized this district is and how much planning this district had done over the last 20 years, frankly, to get to this point. We've never worked with a district that has been this organized and had this much foresight to get to this point. So it's been an absolute pleasure to work with this group because you guys are so thoughtful about every move that you've made over the last 10 years. So what I wanted to do tonight is kind of do a little bit of what's existing and what we're proposing, a little story here. So we'll start with the existing site plan of the Oak Hill Middle School site. And, you know, what's really great about this project is it's a very well-designed building. Steve Black designed the building, and it's just, he is the king of middle schools in the state of Maine. He's very good at them. And he did a very nice, very forward-thinking design. But there are some limitations that you have here that we want to try to improve on. And one of them is that right now there's only one access to the site. And typically, you know, current safety standards, you want to see 2 points of access to a site. In part because the fire department wants to be able to have easy access to the site while other people are trying to leave, right? But that's also true in the case of any other kind of emergency on site as well. But also, just in terms of site circulation safety, you want the buses to have their drop-off and the parents to have their drop-off. When you start mixing those things together, I know Mr. Wilson has done an amazing job at choreographing that all happening so that there aren't kids darting in front of buses, et cetera. But it's a much better scenario if you can have multiple access points to the site. But also, as Andy was saying, that the site was planned for an addition, so there is plenty of available space on site for the addition. There's an interesting situation on this site that I don't know if many of you know about, but there's an ExxonMobil pipeline. Everybody's going, the pipeline.
We know.
I didn't.
I could have told you that.
Yeah.
So, there's no problem with putting play fields over that. There's no problem with putting ball fields, et cetera, but we can't build over it. So that's our only limitation. So although the property line kind of goes down like this, and you've got kind of a ravine here, we can't really cross this line. Not really a big problem though, because what we're proposing fits within that space. So right now what happens is this is your single point of access. This is your drop-off loop, and then this is for your parking and parents. And so we're proposing to keep all of that. Oops, I have to put it in the right direction. Oh no, it's not working. The gadget didn't work. And then adding a second point of entrance up here. Now we're in conversations with the road commissioner and the DOT because I know that there are some sightline concerns there because it's right at the top of the hill. But we're going to work through with them on that so that we can get that second means of access to the site. So we'll keep this as the bus loop, and then we'll add this access point for parent drop-off. And that just keeps all that stuff separate, so much safer on the site, right? And then we're proposing that the addition happen in this section here. And right now, what we're looking at is to keep your play fields essentially where they are. There's some good cost savings there. We can sort of squeeze that building in there and still keep your ball fields where they are, not have to rebuild those. We'll have a little bit of regrading kind of around the perimeter of the building, but primarily we think we can make that work. And then we'll add additional parking, so there'll be a total of 125 parking spaces, plenty of parking for staff, visitors, parents, etc. And events as well. And then just like Andy was talking about, we're still gonna have 2 points of access to the building because one entrance will be for the 2nd through 4th graders and the other entrance will be for the 5th through 8th graders. So we're keeping those separate so that again, we're trying to, keep them from commingling too much. So that's the site plan. This is the existing building. And I don't know if all of you have been here, but I like to kind of run through it just in case not everybody has. So the primary entrance is here. Main office is right there. Perfect, very safe scenario. You kind of get to a checkpoint with the office before you get into the building. And then also it's set up perfectly so that you can have some public spaces, public use spaces, the gymnasium, the cafeteria, without kind of bringing the after hours folks back into the academic wings. But you have cafeteria, kitchen, there's a performing platform here, full-size gym, music, band, art, and then there's classroom wings here. And the classroom wings are set up really nicely so that, Annie was talking about the pods, so that you can have, right now I think you've got 5th and 6th, 7th and 8th on the upper floor. So you've got the co-teaching scenario set right up there. And it sort of makes sense that one grade is this direction, one grade is that direction, but they can kind of work together. So we've had lots of meetings with Kathy and Ben and other staff in the project so that we can understand, and the kitchen service people, all the food service people, the various facilities folks, so that we can understand what the needs are in the building and how the building functions, and what you're doing currently that works really well and what you want to do in the future, so that we can design something that works for all the things that are working well for you now and also kind of supports all the future of education delivery in this district. So that's the existing plan. Second floor is very similar. Second floor, same as the first. The library's on the second floor, some resource rooms, and again, those potted classroom wings. So you can have those, the 2 grades that kind of co-work together. And so what we're proposing is an addition that utilizes a few of the existing spaces. So the key spaces in the existing building that are going to be used to support the addition are the kitchen and probably the library to an extent, although we're still in talks about how that's going to work out. And the reason to do that is that just for, when we talked with the food service team, they felt very confident that their kitchen can serve all of the students out of their kitchen. The cafeteria is not sized for all of the students. So what we're talking about doing is creating a multi-purpose room that will be a cafeteria and gymnasium space with a warming kitchen that will allow them to serve simultaneous lunches in the building for the 2 different grade levels. But then that way the food service staff, they have their one kitchen that they're preparing all their meals out of, and then they can wheel the carts down to the trays, the tray carts, caddies or whatever they are, down to the warming kitchen, stick all those trays into the warming cabinets and serve meals for the upper grade levels out of that space. They really like that idea. We've had our kitchen designer meet with them, talk about what changes they might need done to their existing kitchen. The big one in the existing kitchen is storage. They don't have enough freezer, cooler, and dry storage space. And so that is a relatively straightforward fix. We'll blow out the existing refrigerator and make that all dry storage, and then add on to the building to have a larger refrigerator freezer unit to support the whole population for both breakfast and lunch. So, similar to the existing building, we'll have a main lobby, a main entrance, again with a checkpoint at the main office. And then your multi-purpose room, that'll actually be a middle school-sized gymnasium with bleachers. Right now, that's what we're looking at, so that it can be used as a PE regular-sized gymnasium, but double duty as a cafeteria during the day. And then an administrative suite with guidance and social workers that support the middle school students. There'll also be a nurse suite there, so we've got 2 nurse suites, one in the lower grade wing, and then one in the upper grade wing. Doesn't make sense to try to have one nurse bouncing back between the 2 spaces, so we had a long conversation about that, and that was definitely the way that you guys wanted to go. And then a more appropriately sized music room for the middle school music program that will include instrument storage and an art room for the middle school program as well. Plenty of storage, and then the classroom wing, and like we taught, like Andy was saying, the classroom wing is set up so that we can still do that podded co-teaching scenario. So you can have 5th and 6th grade, 7th and 8th grade, and there'll be dedicated science classrooms for each of those 4 grades. So the other thing that Andy had mentioned is spaces for life skills and day treatment. So one of the things that we heard from the district is that day treatment is something that, looking forward, again, this district has been so good about looking forward. Day treatment is something that you want to be able to offer in district because it's so expensive to send out of district, right? So now's your opportunity. If you have the space, you can offer the services in district. So we've been working with the special ed director to understand exactly what those spatial needs are. We've got those allocated. And then I think one of the big things that we've been working with this district on in terms of making sure that we have those 21st century learning program spaces, those flexible spaces that can become other things in the future as the technologies change and as the learning modalities change. But right now we know that STEM, STEAM, collaborative learning, active learning, all that sort of hands-on learning stuff is really important, and it's a big part of your curriculum. So we have dedicated STEM and maker spaces also in this layout. So that's the first floor, and then the second floor, again, similar with podded classrooms and dedicated science classrooms, as well as your sort of restorative programs for your behavior programs. So that's the sort of programmatic stuff in a nutshell. What I wanted to kind of hit on really quickly is similar to the existing building, we've set up the larger spaces for community use after hours. So the idea being that this lobby can still be accessed after hours for this multi-purpose room. There's a group of public bathrooms that are available, but then there's a cross-corridor door system there so that can be locked off, so that you can have it open for rec or after school or events or whatever, PTO, whatever you need, and then you can still keep the rest of the access to the building secure. And I think that's important, it's common, and it's great to think that you guys now would have 2 of those spaces in one building that you could do that have the same kind of security setup. And as I mentioned before, 5th grade, 6th grade with science, dedicated science for each, maker spaces, and this is sort of like a shared kitchen collaborative space. One of the things that we've talked about with the special ed teachers is the idea that the life skills program often uses kitchen, but day treatment would like to use kitchen, maybe the language teachers might like to use the kitchen.
Part 1 of the existing building. Anything else I'm missing, Kathy?
No, I think you hit it. I
Okay.
think you hit all the high spots. So what we'd love to hear from you are sort of first of all, any questions or concerns you have about what we've presented. And then also I think what's really helpful is if we as a group who are, later this year, planning to put this out to referendum, what you think some of the challenges might be, what you think some of the things might be that will help the project succeed. It's really useful for us to hear from you what you think will make the project successful. So we'd love to know that, and I'm gonna take notes. Any questions? Does anybody have any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
So a couple of things. Can you, educate me as to what size-wise the difference is going to be through the current gymnasium to this, multi-purpose space that you're talking about, that would also be a gymnasium, but how is it going to be comparable to what's already there?
Yep, so that's a great question. So, there are a couple of things that it won't be a competition gymnasium. And that's probably because a couple of things. One, it'll still have 6 backboards. We'll probably put 6 backboards in so that you can have plenty of PE space. And so that you could run a rec program in there. One of the challenges that we're going to have in there, and maybe it can be a competition. We haven't sorted all that out. But with this being the warming kitchen here, and one of your backboards being here, we'll have to make sure that we have enough safety zones there for. We won't be able to put pads up on the wall behind that main backboard there. So we haven't fully developed that yet. We also haven't fully developed whether that's going to be a wood floor or a sports scrape
That
flooring.
was going to be my next
We
question.
don't know the answer to that question yet.
I can tell you feedback, and anybody who's had kids in rec, Robbie in particular, utilizing Sabatis Primary School was a nightmare because of the flooring. It's tiling, it's a Kappa gymatorium, there is no traction, and there's not a lot of additional space away. I will tell you that the rec programs have a high amount of participation.
Yeah.
In terms of Sabatis and Wales, and then having Litchfield join a lot. I think if we're gonna do this, we need to do it right, and we probably should make that as much as possible, to be available for competition as well.
Okay.
Because quite frankly, if we're gonna spend money to build this, I think we need to have the foresight to be able to say, we built this big enough so that all of these things can happen. And if we shortcut, and I understand, like, flooring wise, but if we don't utilize that space for truly all of possibilities, then we're not making smart decisions.
Okay, great. That's excellent feedback. Thank you.
Yeah. The other concern I had in question was, a library in the middle school.
Yep.
And, having gone through a whole bunch of fun this week then, quite frankly, we need to have a space that is dedicated for, 5th through 8th grade that, is a library space as well. It's essential for all students to have that access. And I think it's appropriate to have the library space, for the younger grades over where it currently is now. But we need to have some space dedicated for a library for students in the middle school part also.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's good feedback.
But
too.
would you agree, Jennifer, that as far as the middle school goes, I mean, thinking about a conventional library for middle school isn't probably the way you should be thinking about it now with technology that we have.
I think
I
we
mean,
can
I
incorporate,
understand,
I think we
right.
can incorporate the maker spaces in
Right.
it as well, but I think we have to have that accessibility
Right,
to the books,
right.
you know, because that's not gonna go away.
And not to, like, our communities don't have their own public library.
Right,
So
we don't have
for
any
a
in
lot
any
our
of the
students-
towns, so we need to have that available for students. Because for some kids, that may be the only opportunity that they get
Right.
physical books
Right.
to bring home to read.
And so much library today is technology.
Right,
Yeah.
right, so they need that.
Yes, please.
Well, I was looking at this, seeing the gym and cafeteria together. How is that gonna work with middle school when they have lunch? Then they can't have any of their gym classes.
Right.
So
I
that's a
was
concern.
wondering about that as well, yeah.
Yeah, that's a programming thing that I think, I don't know if Kathy and Ben have sorted that out yet exactly, but that is something that will need to be thought about in terms of sequencing of when specials happen.
Because right now, it's Nevada's primary. They have to serve lunch in there, so they can't have gym during that class.
Right, yep.
And then you gotta pull tables out if you have a really nice floor, like, you know, the wood
Right.
floor, that's,
Right.
that can cause damage to your floor as well.
I have a question, but I'm not sure it's in the scope of this around outdoor play space. So if this
Yep.
was-
Yeah, please,
Yep.
Yeah.
please.
Is that coming up or has
I-
that been talked about?
We have talked about it a little bit. We need to still sort it out. One of the things that we've been thinking about is making sure that we have separate spaces.
Yes.
Right? So right now, we're looking at the younger grades would have some soft play space over here, and the upper grades would have some space over here. This field is just a drawing, it's just lines on this drawing, so it can scoot a little bit if we needed to. We're working with the civil engineer right now to understand grading so that we can get some flat spaces in there. But yes, we understand that we need two separate play spaces. We do wanna make sure that, you know, if we're providing play spaces, they are contiguous to the fields, because you don't wanna have kids on one side of the building, half the kids on one side of the building, half the kids on the other side. So we do kind of need to have them both on, and it's also a safety measure to have the play spaces on this side of the building away from the traffic. So, we're looking at, like, we looked at maybe doing something here, but then you could potentially have kids here and here, and that's a supervision issue. So we're looking at, middle school, you know, some basketball hoops and foursquare and that type of thing. And then also, a soft play area for the younger kids up there. So we're working through that right now with our supervision.
Has there been any conversation, because I know how the land is there and the pipeline going through it, what sort of permitting there can be to be able to kind of have fill in the ravine? Because if you're gonna talk about,
Here.
and kind of bringing the field down a little more, because you did say that you could create play space over the pipeline.
Yep.
Yeah.
So my concern with this is, having had kids who played on the softball field, chasing foul balls and going down over the
Yeah.
ravine,
Yes.
in with the poison ivy and everything else, it's not safe.
Yeah.
So my suggestion would be that you try to do something to fill that in, dependent upon the permitting, but also if you're looking at trying to have a soccer field or a multi-purpose field, whatever that's gonna be, it would be soccer hopefully and whatever else, you may need to shift that down and fill in
Yeah.
if
That's
you
right.
wanna have paved playing spaces.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe rotate how it is so that it's going the longer way down. But
Yep.
again,
Yep.
we have not just school teams utilizing this, but we have rec
Right.
that is very busy, all evenings and all weekend.
Yeah.
And so it really needs to be something, that has enough space and is safe.
That's a great point. Study what we can do to
Right.
avoid sending kids in after the balls.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we could fill that in
Yeah.
and clean that whole area out for at least 100 yards, maybe we can turn the soccer field and give us a little more space behind the building
Right,
for a play area.
right.
Yeah,
I'd put a whole soccer field down there.
I would,
I
I
would-
would caution that
yeah.
you make it a regulatory soccer space.
Yes.
Like what is there currently, not making it any smaller.
Correct.
Cause as
Right.
a rec director that does soccer, we use the middle school field
All
a
the
lot,
time.
all the time.
all the time. That's the
All
only
the
field
time.
that we have access to.
The way that that building is coming into that soccer field doesn't really make any sense to me. I don't know why it's not completely spun around and
Right.
a horseshoe shape along with going around the rotary circle. It seems like
Well, it'd be in the way of the softball field.
no, it wouldn't. If you move that, if you twist that thing to the right and put it up against the other section of the building.
You say move the field?
No,
Yeah.
the building.
Well,
Over the building.
Yeah, twist your hand to the right.
Like this.
Boom. Keep going though. All the way, yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things we think about is the solar orientation of the
Yeah.
building too. So we're very conscious about, minimizing heat gain in those classroom wings, because that's an energy conservation measure. So we have the classroom wings in particular oriented so that we'll minimize heat gain in those classrooms. But, and we did look at, could we spin it around this way, but, we are trying to keep as much of the existing field.
How much
as
property do
possible.
we have down
We
in that
have a
lower
pretty
corner?
substantial side right there.
I mean, you could
This is
make a step down
quite
section
low.
and just have
Yeah,
sports
but
fields
this
down
low.
there.
It's very, very low.
Yeah.
So right now, the building already steps, a
Yeah, it
total
goes down
of,
a lot.
3 feet from the existing building. We're stepping the existing building down. And this down here is quite the ravine.
Yeah.
And fill is very expensive, so we're trying to stay within the existing sort of leveled area from the existing, construction.
And I think, but that's an issue that comes back to the cafeteria gymnasium too.
Right.
I mean, you're not gonna build a whole separate building so you can play basketball in. And I know it's not an ideal situation, but you can still practice rec on that
Right.
gymnasium cafeteria.
Right.
You can still practice, the rec there and have games there for rec and use the
Other.
existing court for competition.
Right.
I will say too, one of the things that's been, really innovative since this building was built is sports flooring.
Yeah, flooring.
So we probably wouldn't do the typical linoleum
yeah.
in this
Right.
multi-purpose space. We
Right.
would do it's a little
It's
bit
got a
of
grip.
Brazilian, it's
It is,
grippy,
okay.
and then it also has a little bit of bounce to it. And you can get it in wood look, so that it actually looks
Yeah.
like wood flooring. And it's a really nice product, and it's, we put it in at, high school, accessory high school gyms all the time, so that they have a competition wood floor, and then they have another gym that they use for PE, or they use for rec, or whatever, that has that sports flooring. It's pretty nice material.
Has there been any consideration around outdoor learning spaces at all in the design?
Yeah, so one of the things, I'm gonna flip to a plan, Doop-a-doop-doop. This one right here. So one of the things that Nat mentioned that I didn't was this, what he called a knuckle space here. And this space it's part of the corridor, but it opens up into a little bit of a gathering space, so informal, maybe you can get a whole class in there, maybe it opens into the maker space, so the maker space can be part of it. But we're also talking about this area being paved, so that it can open out to an outdoor classroom space as well. Yep. Great question. Yes.
Are they going to do anything to the existing building?
Yeah, so, right now, the scope of work for the existing building is to make the connection here, and then to do a little bit of renovation in the kitchen so that it can support the larger school population. And that would include, we haven't exactly figured out where the freezer cooler goes. They have a nice window here that we'd like to leave for them if we can. So we need to kind of figure out exactly where that freezer cooler goes. But then this cooler would go away, and we would make all of this dry storage. That right now is the only scope of work that we're planning for the building, the existing building. The rest.
Air conditioning.
Oh, yes, oh, right, thank you.
Yeah.
Air conditioning, that's the big one, that's right.
Yeah.
That plus a little bit of air conditioning, other two.
Right.
So we are looking at doing air conditioning in the existing building in the spaces that aren't currently air conditioned. And then everything else will be sort of programmatic changes, because obviously we're putting a completely different set of grade levels in there. So it'll be a little bit more of a Tetris of rearranging the classrooms. I mean, I think that you guys have done an amazing job this year of getting the 5th grade into that building, and taking over some spaces. It'll be nice, I think, to free some of those spaces back up so that they can function as your 2 through 4 STEM spaces, and your maybe there's another day treatment area in there as well for the behavior programs for the younger kids as well. So reading recovery, all of that stuff. You've got a lot of support spaces that you have space for.
And Diane, we'll have to just.
I was just gonna ask.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say the
Yeah.
toilet
Yeah.
size.
Yeah,
Yeah.
shrink the toilets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I-
We see that with, when we do before or after care,
Yeah.
44 in the summer.
Yeah.
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 What I was thinking of is that empty space in the back of the building, that would be great for some outdoor classrooms.
This back here,
Yeah,
This current gardening, the gardens are
Yeah.
there.
Right
now,
in it?
And there's a greenhouse with,
Yeah.
I haven't walked back there, but.
Yeah.
yeah.
Is there some sort of access road to the back of the buildings? Because
Yeah.
I'm seeing like everything in the front for everybody else,
Mhm.
but I'm wondering if there's going to be something there for emergency vehicles too.
yeah, so existing right now is a roadway that goes around to here.
Okay,
And what we'll do is, kind of start to see it here, is we'll provide access back around this way as well.
Yeah,
As part of
okay,
the, yeah.
good.
So they'll be able to get around either end
Yeah,
of the building.
good.
And we need to have some additional meetings to make sure we get all the fire hydrants they need and connections, et cetera.
Mhm.
Fire hydrants, Mark.
Yes, I was actually gonna come up with a sewer stations too, but we'll wait
Yep.
till you guys are ready. Is there, what's the increase in population for the students?
You'd be getting about 300 more.
Is anything consideration about upgrading that sewer station?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we'll be at least adding another one or upgrading what's there, yes.
Because I work for the water and sewer before.
Yep, yep. And we'll need to put I think we're looking at putting another water entrance into the addition as well for fire, for the sprinkler pumping. You had a question. Did you have a question? No?
Okay.
Okay.
I guess my question is, it looks like there's 4 classrooms per pod.
Yes, four
Is it-
o'clock, yep.
Is that enough?
4 in a science.
Four plus
Okay.
science.
4 and
Yeah.
a science.
Yep, so there are
Yeah.
five per grade level.
I wasn't thinking the science, I'm thinking 4, I'm like, that's 25 kids per grade, that's.
Yeah.
Too much.
No, it's 'cause the science lab looks kind of different, so yeah, it's 4 with science. Yep.
So, and then, in following suit from the last 20 years of planning that this district has done, one of the things that we're looking at is making sure that we design the building in terms of egress and firewall and fire protection, et cetera, so you can put an addition on it again. So the idea is that right now, we are dedicating this end here as the place that you could add another layer of classrooms and spaces if you need to in the future. So, we were just looking today actually at how where the firewall needs to be and making sure that we have enough stair egress and all that, so that if you need to add classrooms in the future, you don't, we're trying to minimize what you have to add on to the building. So the idea would be that you can, slap 4 more classrooms onto the building if you need to, and have the rest of the building function the way it needs to, so.
But in reality, we can't you're very limited as to what you can actually put there because of the current pipeline situation.
Yeah, you're quite a ways away from the pipeline, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, the pipeline is
That
Yeah.
is showing,
Yeah.
okay.
You've got room at least for 4 more.
Yeah.
We
Okay,
pulled
good.
the building back so that we would have room for
Right,
an addition.
okay, good.
Yes.
I'm not sure if this is part of it, but what are they doing with the road? Because that road is narrow coming in, and it's really difficult for kids that are coming out of school. I live on the next street just off there where your entrance is gonna come out, where your new one
Yeah.
is, across there, and it's dangerous. Kids are jumping up off the side of the road. There's no sidewalk or anything, and there's no light there to really make you aware that the school there, there's a little hill that comes up right before, and then you're right on the entrance, and
Yep.
it's
And at
dangerous.
7 AM, traffic's backed up almost to that.
Yeah, I can't get
Yeah.
out of that
Yeah, it
street
is.
at all.
Yeah.
So up to here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm hopeful, 2 things. We don't have all that sorted out yet. We're still working with the DOT on that to see, exactly what we need to do at that entrance to make it safe. And the other thing is that I'm hopeful that by separating the parent drop-off from the bus drop-off, that will hopefully reduce some of the congestion in the roadway. You don't think so?
I don't think buses are gonna be able to get through.
You don't think buses will be able to get through here to come in there?
Right, because parents get there really early, and with pickup, more so than drop-off, like parents show up half an hour to 45 minutes early to be first in line.
Oh, yeah.
It's a really interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, that happens at my kid's school too.
Yeah.
But I will say, just thinking, because I thought about that too,
Yeah.
with the size of that parking lot,
That's true.
you're actually gonna, you
Yeah.
have 125 spaces, so you actually have a ton of room
To pull in.
to pull in.
Okay.
I mean, the volume of cars that will actually be able to filter through that parking lot is pretty substantial. I
And-
thought the same thing.
And with one school, the bus runs won't be as long
Yeah.
for some kids.
Well, it's still gonna be staggered
be
though.
Still
It'll be
staggered.
staggered, but yeah, but I'm
Right.
thinking like those
Yeah.
kids that live, they're only coming here, you don't have to go to a different school before you stop here.
Right.
Right.
Sort of thing.
Yeah.
Which will be bringing about 300 in at one point and 400 in at another. So it'll be, the staggered starts will help out that congestion a lot.
Any other questions, comments? So now the question that I mentioned before, what do you think are the things that are going to, be hang-ups for this project? And what do you think are gonna be the things that help us get it, help make it successful? For those two, anybody have any of those? I always, that's a good question,
Yeah.
because you guys might have different ideas about what you think the hang-ups are gonna be for a project like this versus what you think might help get the project.
And that's why we invited you here tonight, was to hear those comments.
I think the hangup is going to be increasing taxes, particularly for those residents that are on fixed incomes. That's something that I'm always concerned about. And also individuals, taxpayers that don't have children in the district. So helping them to understand the community benefit, what's in it for me, is going to be critical in our community.
I think one of the things that we have our work cut out for us, with your business manager is to understand what you're paying right now to maintain the existing buildings and what you'll be paying for the bond for the new building without those.
Yes.
And because there's going to be a delta, maybe the delta is zero, or maybe the delta is minimal, and I think that's an important math problem for us to sort out.
Okay, because we're already spending $500,000 a year
Right.
to maintain those two buildings.
Well, each building, right?
No,
Oh,
it's
oh,
total.
okay.
Yeah,
And that was just operational.
and that was just
Right.
operational
Right.
costs. That's not putting a new roof on a building,
Right.
you know, 3 years from now, or adding another, you know,
New
whatever.
sprinkler system, new,
So, If,
you know,
if we
all
can
of
get that number down, and what the bond costs us a year to build the building, it's, you know, it's
Still
not gonna impact taxes that largely.
Yeah, there's projections.
Right.
What it would cost in
Right.
year one, what would it cost 15 years?
Right,
from now,
sure.
those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Yep.
Does Sabanus Primary still need a new boiler?
It will, Diane, in the next 5 years,
Yeah.
at least in the next 5 years.
And
And it needs a roof now.
And I do agree it needs new ventilation because
Right.
I was in there for 5 years and I was sick every year. I
Yeah.
went to Carrie Ricker and I haven't been sick.
Right. Any
Really?
building designed at least
Yeah.
25 years ago, you're talking changing the air out in that building compared to buildings of today.
Right.
I mean, we're changing air hourly today compared to, we never even thought about it 25 years ago.
And it's all based on occupancy.
Right,
That's
and it's
the
all
thing.
based on occupancy.
Triggered. Jill.
So I think some of the other concern from some of the community members would be, yes, it's going to be an increase in taxes for them, but it's also going to be another increase in cost to the towns that are going to absorb these aging buildings that we haven't fixed. So I think that is also going to be something that is, and it's been said a lot within the communities that, if we haven't been willing to kind of put in any of that money, now the towns are going to absorb that, and what's the cost going to be for them on the other end, absorbing the older buildings that we don't essentially want anymore because of the cost of fixing them or maintaining them.
So I think that one of the things that will be important for us to maybe speak to a little bit is, and we can work with you guys on that too, is what, you know, what the potential uses are for those buildings and what the upgrade needs are for those uses versus what they might be for a fully loaded student building.
That would be helpful.
And I think that that's something that we can help
Yeah.
you with.
Because I think in the communities that are coming up, they're trying to start to think about, okay, down the line, because this isn't happening obviously next year, but down the line, our towns are going to start absorbing this cost, and so they're trying to look to the future of what it will cost their town and how that will look, and why can't we keep students? I'm just thinking that might be helpful to persuade some of the community members.
Has there been conversations about how those buildings might get used in the future?
There's been some chat.
Yeah.
There's been some chatter.
Some chatter?
Yes.
Yeah. Community buildings, yeah. Yes.
I'll speak from the town that lost the last building. You know, and I guess I'll just, pose the question, I don't know how Sabattis and Litchfield are gonna feel about losing their small schools. That might be a concern. I know it was a concern for Wales when we lost our school.
There's much pressure at that point.
But in regards to, the maintenance of the building, there's the assumption that the communities may want to absorb those buildings, but they get like first refusal, but if they don't want it, they don't have to accept it.
No.
So,
That's
that's
true.
just potential.
So, as a community member, I might not know that, so that might be a good thing to kind of point out to some of them, that's the potential of what may come of those buildings. They
Right.
don't have to take it, or they do.
Well, they
take
can take it and they can sell it,
Right.
Or they could refuse it.
or they could
and the
refuse it.
district could sell it.
Yeah, and the district could sell it.
And to your point about the towns losing their schools, I think when we not consolidated, but moved all students pre-K and kindergarten at Libby Tozier, it's no longer just Litchfield kids that go there. So I think that has kind
Right.
of already started. Yes, but then you all lost it in this, for sure.
Yeah, because it was your own school.
The generator that was put in, Robbie, was that designed to take the load of the new building also?
I don't believe it was. I do not believe that, because we were so far down the road. We didn't, and I think we got that, Andy, with,
And that was CRF funds.
yeah, CRF funds.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
huge. I mean,
Yeah.
it is massive.
Yeah.
It will run the entire building currently.
Yeah.
We don't have it hooked up to its capacity at this point. We went big on purpose.
Yeah.
Because of this, but I just, not knowing what it was gonna look like.
How big is that?
What's that?
How big is
Oh, I don't remember what it's like. It's massive.
Yeah, it's, yeah.
The rest is slow down.
Yeah.
It's big enough to run the whole building, not just certain
Pieces.
pieces of it.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
yeah.
especially where,
It should have been done at least 15 to 30%.
Yeah, I'm sure it probably was,
It
but
was.
can you add another whole building to it? No.
You don't
Yeah.
have to run everything in the new building.
Right,
The generator,
Right.
you need to keep those things that are critical.
right. Life services, freezers, stuff like that. Yeah.
You don't have classes going, if you don't have power, you can anyway, so.
Right.
But to keep the freezers, and keep, the lights on.
Yeah.
Do you use the middle school currently as a shelter or like a warming station?
We have not, but we could.
Carrie
That was
Rickers.
one of the-
Carrie Rickers is shelter.
For the generator, because
So that, and that was one of the reasons, right? So think about,
Yeah.
we put one at the high school
Yeah.
for that purpose, so we had, that one there, and then we put this one at middle school, so now all three towns have a building with a generator there.
The thing to look at, and we'll do this with the engineers, is, since you already have like your hot water, your heat in the gymnasium, you have it set up so it can be used as a shelter or warming station or whatever. Can we just add life safety,
Yeah.
and, the pumps and
Right.
the, sewer pump, et cetera, to the,
We're separate.
you're
But if you
separate.
guys wanna add those, I'm all for
Hey.
that.
Well,
Yeah.
some people say,
Absolutely. That way we don't have to go out there.
it depends on, what we have to get where, right, but, so we'll look into that and see how much of that stuff we can add to the existing generator, or if we need to add a generator just for those things in order to keep the existing building functioning the way you have it currently set up so that it can be a shelter. Yes?
You had mentioned
mentioned, when we had a roof done at the high school, 63% was funded by the state. For this referendum, will it be all taxpayer supported, or will the state be helping out?
We're not in a place for state funding at this point as far as like a state-funded school construction project. And you know, we'd probably be 25 years away from that, easy, if not more. And so, you know, looking at SRRF funds, you can't really tap into SRRF funds for new construction like this, on this scale. But there is an infrastructure bill, the infrastructure money that's coming, that we'll take a look at.
Also, one thing to consider, and we can talk about this a little bit more too, is the SRF funds could be used for like your bathroom upgrades in the existing building, your changes in the existing building. The SRF funds work a little bit differently. You bond it and then get reimbursed for it, so it's a little bit different, but.
Yeah, you bond the whole thing. So like with the roof, we bonded the whole thing, and then the state kicks in 63% to the bond bank. And that's based upon your receivership.
Yeah. But that could be something that you could factor into the project. Or it could be something that you don't count on and you could benefit from it later. Historically, they've offered the revolving renovation funds every year. They had a huge hiatus where they didn't do it for like 3 or 4 years, and then they just did it 2 years in a row, and they might have another application. We don't know. It's a little bit sporadic.
And the referendum, when are we expecting that?
We're looking at August for that.
And you think the figures and everything will be ready based on a lot of the things that are still in progress?
I think we'll be.
Yes, we're working with our cost estimators starting next week or the week after next to do cost estimating, and then I'll work with the district to build a budget. So we should be able to do some fancy math starting in June to understand what the cost impact will be, mill rates, et cetera.
I don't know how many voters turn out in August referendum versus a November type voting.
So that's a good question. We also are thinking about when we can start construction. So it takes us about a year to do contract documents. We can probably do it in a little bit less than a year, which would get you starting construction in the summer, which is ideal for trying to get foundations, et cetera, into the ground, so you're not paying for winter conditions. You can save some money that way. If you don't do the referendum until November, then you're not starting construction until the following fall, and it's more difficult to get your foundations in.
And not only that, looking at the bond, being able to go out to bond, if we do it in August, we can put in for the bond, if the project is accepted, we won't have to wait for another whole bond cycle in order to come on board.
So you'll minimize your ban.
Questions raised by some of the parking committee
Yeah,
members.
sure.
Like, why is it being done in an August versus when most people would turn out to vote?
Yeah.
Well, it's not nefarious. It really is about construction schedule, conditions, what you want to pay. Well, we don't want you to have to pay for winter conditions if we can avoid it. And then the bonding, because then you'll have less of a ban, right?
Right.
You won't have to take out a bond anticipatory note for as much
Right.
time if you can scoop the bond up a little bit sooner.
So I think having some answers for things like that, little bullet points like what you had, you know, so those are concerns that people might think there was something.
That's great.
Why is it being pushed?
That's great, and I think one thing that we could talk about doing is like an FAQ.
Yes.
We can pull together an FAQ with answers, and you can post that right on the website so that people can have that at their fingertips. That's
Yeah.
great, thank you.
The referendum, what is it asking folks? Is it to asking folks to close the school, or is it asking, is it double, like?
It's a double.
Okay.
So one of the, what's different here, so when the RSU closed Wales, the Wales school, it was due to lack of need. And so the district didn't need to do a construction project or anything like that, close the school, assimilate it into the other buildings. So because of that, that required it required a vote of the board to close the school, and then it required a referendum of the towns that send students to that building. Because this will, and that's what I thought we were going to have to use for the process here. We had a long conversation with the attorney a couple of months ago. And because it's not lack of need, because it's due to a construction project, the approval of the construction project is the approval to close the school. So it's dual purpose.
So that's helpful, I think,
Yeah.
because I don't think people even know what they're gonna be voting on.
Yeah.
They just know that there's a referendum coming, but have no idea what it's gonna be asking of them.
And that was
would be-
learning for me, because I had always thought there was just that lack
Yeah.
of need process, and there's not.
Okay.
It's built in the law.
So what would the anticipated opening be of the new school?
Okay, so, calendar math. 2022, 2025.
And that was on 25, September 25.
Yes.
Another thing that might be helpful, sorry, coming from the budget committee, I can see a lot of numbers. When you provide in your slideshow about the upcoming budget, you say how much it impacts a $100,000 home in the community. That's also helpful, I think, when, how does this impact taxes?
Yes.
in a-
Yep. So we'll work through the mill rates on it, and we'll have that information as part of the, public meeting before the referendum.
I just think with the FAQ section, all of the pieces that we have been asking about, the one vote is going to cover all of the closure as well as approval or non-approval. There was something else that somebody said too. It'll come to me, but having all of that information and being very transparent about it so that if people have further questions about it, I think it, who they can contact.
I think that's a great idea. One of the things that we have done in the past that's really helpful is to have an FAQ and then also have a portal that people can enter questions in.
Yeah,
Because often, and then we can add that to the FAQ.
yeah.
So that's
I think that
we'll
would
work
be
with the IT team to kind of create that on the website.
Yeah.
Great. Anything else? Such great feedback today. Thank you all so much. Really good, thoughtful questions. I would expect nothing less of this community. You guys are so on top of it. Thank you so much for your time. I'll turn it back over to you, Bob.
Thank you both.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you for the information. If there are no other questions, we do have 2 other community briefings coming up. We have one next Thursday, I believe, and that's going to be where?
No, Carrie Rickers.
At Carrie Ricker
Yeah.
at 6:30,
And I'll put that in.
and then 2 weeks following that
At the middle school.
at the middle school. All right? So they'll make their presentation open to the community. Those people that you're talking to that are asking you questions,
26.
one thing, please try and get them to come out to one or the other. I would encourage the board members that are especially from Litchfield to attend the Litchfield one and Sabattis, the Sabattis one. I have a conflict meeting next week, but I will be at the one on the 27th, I believe that is.
26.
That's it, last Thursday there. So let's get the word out. The more people that are knowledgeable, the more transparent we can be about this, the greater the opportunity we have to be successful. And success here means that we can provide better educational opportunities over the long haul for what will actually turn out to be less funding by being able to bring the students together into a new building and close those 2 older ones. So if there are no other questions, no other comments?
I just, is there any other feedback that you think we need to hear?
I'll think about
Okay, yeah.
One of the questions I was thinking of was just the timing of this being such that all of a sudden we're right at the height of construction costs, being able to explain that and why, and justify why it's still worth going ahead.
Well, to speak to that, I can tell you that when we built the middle school for $9 million. That same building today would be roughly 30. So it's never gonna get any cheaper. by putting it off. And not only that, the longer you wait, the more you have problems with those other two buildings. So consequently, we already have to put a boiler into Libby Tozier, and Sabatis needs a roof, it needs boilers, it needs upgrades for climate systems, heating, all that never gets any cheaper. And it's like any project that you do today is going to cost you less than it will tomorrow. And that's my thinking of it. So we can say, okay, we put it off for 20 years to see if we can get on the construction list for the state. Well, there's no guarantee to get on that list, for one thing. And to wait 20 years with now, not only will you have 2 old buildings, you'll have 3 other old buildings that are 20 years older too. So I think we're trying to be proactive instead of reactive, because we've been reactive in the past plenty of times. I mean, when Bob and I got here, what was our budget for maintenance?
Wasn't much.
It wasn't
And
much.
it kept getting cut every
And
time.
my second year here, we had to go out for a $750,000 bond just to make Oak Hill acceptable, so we could put students in it. So over the years, we've tried to be proactive instead of reactive, and I think this is one more step in that.
Right, and you could hold the board responsible, not necessarily the current members, except for maybe Robbie Guy and Vicky was around off and on. You know, we should have done this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
We could just never pull the trigger.
Yeah.
You know, we knew we had to do it. We wanted to do it. We talked about it forever, but somehow we didn't get the support, I guess, to help us make that decision and pull the trigger. So, you know, we should already be in this. The other ones should already be closed, and the towns being able to use them, they would be 10 years in better shape than they're going to be. You know, there's been a lot of pluses, but we're here now. We just don't want to delay it any longer and suffer more financial jeopardy and provide a better educational opportunity for the students, because that's really what it is about, is providing an education.
Yeah, that's super. I think that's, if you can capture that, that's what the
Yeah,
communities are
right.
going to look into.
Yeah.
Well, and to also consider that our newest building is the current middle school, and that's 15 years old.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sitting here thinking, my kids started in there, and I'm like, what? It's crazy.
Got to be more than
So-
15, doesn't it?
No,
No,
it
that's
was
15.
opened in 2007.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know I wasn't on the board all that long before that school was built. And I mean, it was Sabatis School, so I wasn't involved with it, but, you know. But someone else had a hand up?
I just wanted to thank our town manager for posing that as a way, this has been a question that's come up, so that you guys are aware that's another question that will be asked.
Yeah,
And I think that we could also add a little piece in there from our cost estimating team, and they can give us a chart of what the industry is showing in terms of
Yeah.
trends
Yeah.
to kind of help ease people, because some people feel like, you know, we're at this peak and it's going to come down, so we can get some industry
That would be helpful,
knowledge
because
to
that
show
is
what
something
they're.
they said, why
Yeah.
build it right now, wait
Right.
for things to go down, it's not that any of us can predict the future.
yeah, and we have to remember, we're looking at occupancy in '25. So we vote now, it's going to be a year before construction starts.
Right, right.
So we're already going to suffer either, if the price starts coming down, we're going to realize that some of that savings. If it doesn't, we're going to eat the more costs. So, you know, there's going to be a delay before we can start.
And to add to that point, Robbie, knowing the legislature and how they're working and
Yeah.
things that are coming down the pipe, code requirements are not gonna get any easier.
No.
No, they're not.
To build now under the codes that we have
Yeah.
before we start.
Well, for a simple fact is, I can speak to that. When we put the roof on Oak Hill 2 years ago, we had to upgrade the roof trusses that cost us an extra $300,000, because the roof we were putting on, because it was such a large area, didn't meet existing snow loads today
Right.
as when the roof was built. So we had to add roof trusses, we had to add support, we had to add all that stuff to put a roof on Oak Hill.
Right.
Okay, so great discussion. Thank you all for voicing your opinion and your questions and comments. I look forward to seeing any and all of you next week at our school board meeting here on Wednesday, if you want to come along. Yeah, and also at these informational meetings, and get the word out in the community, please. So with no other business come before this workshop, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.